Go. Today is the 9th of Tevet. We're in between Parshas Vayigash and Vayechi. Well, we're in the week of Vayechi. Chazak, finishing the book of Bereshis. And as I mentioned, on a personal level, we have a double simcha this week. We'll be making a bar mitzvah of my son Elimelech and a wedding for my son Levi. And I have 2 Tevet stories to tell you from our family treasure chest, which are relevant to the theme. And the theme of today is the 9th of Tevet, darkest before the dawn. Darkest before the dawn. Okay, so by way of introduction, the 3 days of the 8th, 9th, and 10th of Tevet have a special significance in the Jewish calendar. Who knows what happened on the 8th of Tevet, on the 9th of Tevet, and the 10th? So let's work backwards. What happened on the 10th of Tevet? We all know. The siege of Yerushalayim, which the Gemara in Sanhedrin in Perek Chelek calls a samach. It's very interesting because samach is the same as smicha, like to press against the walls. The pressure began. Siege is the pressure. And that was selected for a special fast day. The question is why? I understand that destruction is a fast day, right? But why is the beginning of a siege? Okay. It was the start of a new level of pressure, but why did Chazal pick that out as a unique fast day? Okay? Here we are in just really the beginning of Tevet. Now, also, what's significant about Tevet? What's very, very important about Tevet that we know before we get to the 9th and the 8th and the 9th is that Tevet, the first 2 days of Tevet are always what? Hanukkah. And they also coincide, generally speaking, with the week that is the shortest day of the calendar year. In other words, the darkest day of the year. So what does Tevet really mark? It marks the turning point, the day, so to speak, the day after the darkest moments. Now, we all know in the non-Jewish world, what do they, that week, if they would think about it from a Jewish calendar, what do they assign to that week? That last week of Kislev, the birth of Yashka, right? That's what they say. Certainly a dark moment in a sense. Well, what it really was is another story. But there is something, a very interesting thing. So first of all, let's look at all the references to darkness. Number 1, the siege of Jerusalem. And Yerushalayim is called Oro Shel Olam, the light of the world. So the light begins to be threatened. In fact, Rabbi Nachman in his famous piece about Tisha B'Av contrasts the idea of Ma'orei Or and Ma'orei Eish. There's a difference between Or and Eish. Or enlightens, Eish destroys. Can also benefit, but when we are worthy, then Yerushalayim is built, and it's Oro Shel Olam, and when we're not worthy, then the enemies can take a torch to it, and Eish. And Eish, of course, is what you use to illuminate the night. So in a sense, Chazal chose the 9th day of Tevet, 10th of Tevet, and these 3 days in general as a combined observance. So let's understand why. Because it's a dark moment. We've gone to the longest night of the year. The time when the people that we associate with Esav, Ze Edom, and according to Chazal, way back in all the Rishonim, Edom morphed into what? Christianity. Why? Because Rome, Ad Hayom Hazeh, is the seat of Christianity. And therefore, Edom, which comprised many geographic locations, but specifically was identified, this is my mother-in-law, come on in. This is Rabbi Lubavitch from Maplewood, New Jersey. Okay, Bruchim Habayim, we'll give you a seat. Thank you. All right. So, that is undisputed among all the Rishonim. Because they understood that Rome that even though when they were still pagan, destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, they quickly were in a process of creating 1,000 years of darkness, a long night. And we mentioned that 1,000 years from the year 240, the sealing of Torah. Again, Torah is called Or. Last time we spoke about the hidden light, right? Last time we gave all those things about. But the sealing of the Mishnah, and for all intents and purposes, the end of the great creative period of the Tanoim, ended at that time, came to a screeching halt, just at the time when Rome was about to turn Christian, which was the year 312. From that point forward, from the year 240 until the Ramban, in 1240, that year of the Rishonim, it was one of the darkest periods in world history. I'm not talking about for the Muslims necessarily. For them it wasn't all that bad. But for the Edom Christian world, the world of Christianity, descended a cloud of darkness upon the world that they had not known since pre-Avraham. What happened to the Christian world? The Christian world. The Jews in the Muslim world, right? But the Jews in the Christian world and our primary gullus, right? Where was the world of Christianity? We're talking about at that time, Spain, right? We're talking about Italy, a little bit Germany, France, even England, right? The whole Western Europe. And of course Eretz Yisrael. Of course Eretz Yisrael, because Eretz Yisrael was under the Byzantine rule for quite a while until it was liberated and so on. And then you get into the period of the Crusades. But the Crusade period was right there. 1099 was the first Crusade. It goes for a couple hundred years. If you want to look at it, by the year 1240 was really when the Crusades were kind of coming to an end. That was that 1,000 years, the dark millennium of Christianity. Europe was a dark place. They had gone backwards from science and knowledge to what? Superstition, illiteracy, belief in witchcraft, and so on and so forth. And also rampant disease, because they had no system of hygiene. They had no knowledge of medicine. It really plunged the world into which eventually ended up in the Black Plague, and then Europe doesn't come out of that so quickly. So, when we speak about darkness, we really speak about a period that began, as we were talking about last time. We spoke about Alexander the Great a little bit about Alexander the Great. It starts, the Greek-Roman period is really one period. So Tevet, which is the last 2 days of Hanukkah, right, is also marking two other important events. One was the Targum Shivim, the Septuagint. Who knows what the Targum Shivim is? Who demanded that the Torah be translated into Greek? Ptolemy. And who is Ptolemy? The heir of Alexander the Great. Correct? So he divided his kingdom into 4 sections, Seleucid, etc. Ptolemy was the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. And Chazal described that day as a day of incredible darkness, that the Torah was translated to Greek. Now, why was that such a day of darkness? Why?
Because they had to, first of all, change certain things.
They had to change certain things because otherwise, we know one of the things that they changed is that they took 70 rabbis. It's interesting, 70 as in 70 nations, as in Sanhedrin, right? Put them in 70 rooms, and they all came up with the same Greek translation. What was the meaning? They changed certain things, like Nasa Adam, they didn't write, and also Bereshis Bar Elokim could be translated as Bereshis, whoever Bereshis is, created God. So they had to rework the wording in Greek. Right. Now, ironically, the book of the Sifrei Torah, written in Greek, in the ancient Greek, have a special status more than other Sfarim. Did you know that? It has a higher level of Kedusha. because it was that, I would say, if you really want to look at this from a linguistic point of view, the pure Hebrew language, right? The biblical Hebrew, Mishnaic Hebrew, even. And then you have Targum, which is Aramaic, okay? And the next thing after that was Greek and then Latin. And that was the descent of Lashon Kodesh into darkness. Now, why do I say darkness? Because all of the drushos of Torah Sheba'al Peh are coming from the written text by diukim that they make in the various letters of the Torah in the original Hebrew. You cannot learn Torah on a rabbinic level, right, unless you're learning it in the original Hebrew. So what you effectively do is separate Torah Shebektav from Torah Sheba'al Peh. You have eliminated the Mishnah and the Talmud, and that is the great darkness. So much so that even Alexander, who was a student of Aristotle, and we know his story we spoke about Shimon HaTzadik, right? Shimon HaTzadik, that's the beginning of the Greek period. So this is the next thing that happened. The next thing that happened was Ptolemy says, let's take the Torah and cut out the divine aspect of it and turn it into what? A book of what? History. Torah no longer becomes Chachmas Hashem. It becomes a human document. That is the terrible, terrible danger. We cut Emunah out of the equation. It doesn't mean that we even cut God out of the equation. Because, I don't know if we mentioned this, but there's actually a brand new book about Alexander the Great, about what his beliefs are. One of my chavrusas told me. He didn't not believe in God. He might have believed in many gods. He just said God has nothing to do with our life. There's no hashgacha pratis. Therefore, there's no nisim. There are no miracles. Because a nes by definition means an abrogation of teva by Hashem. And the essential belief of Rome, and the essential teaching of Alexander the Great and Aristotle, and of Ptolemy and everybody else, is that, yeah, there may have been miracles. There may have been a Maimon Har Sinai, there may have been a prophet Moses and a prophet Elijah and everything else. But now, mankind has lost contact with Hashem. The era of prophecy came to a screeching end exactly, almost to the moment that Alexander appears on the scene.
He believed before the miracle?
Nobody disputed that there could have been miracles. But the change in the world was, something happened. We lost Nevuah. Nevuah stopped. Why did Nevuah stop? There was, very good, there was a Beis HaMikdash. And there is, as we mentioned, Aron Kodesh hidden. But in order to have the Or HaTorah from the hidden, is that you have to have Torah Sheba'al Peh. And if you deny the Torah's divinity, then you deny the possibility of Hashem's miraculous intervention into our lives, which is what Hashgacha Pratis is. So this is the ball game, and you can understand everything about modern man, Western man, from this point.
That's the basis of Hellenism.
That is Hellenism. That is Hellenism. There may be a God, but he will not allow you to supersede the natural order. Everything works based on Teva. And science is the study of Teva. The rules of nature is science. And hence, Ptolemy was a great academic. The university that he built, he wanted to collect every book in the world. Why? He wanted to have the greatest library of wisdom in the world. So he said, how could I have a library without a copy of the Jewish Torah? Now I'm going to take this one step further based on a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Fascinating Gemara in Sanhedrin. Look what happened here. Now I'm going to explain it to you deeply. Everything that goes around comes back again. So the Canaanim, otherwise known as like the Palestinians, but they were really Africans because they were Arabs. The Arabs originate in where? Egypt, correct, and the other Arab countries. They came to Alexander the Great the minute he conquered Israel and said, guess what? This land belongs to the Canaanim. And the Gemara calls them Africans. Sure, they were Africans. They were Egyptian. They might have been from other places in North Africa. And Phoenicians who came in, right? What were Plishtim? Who were Plishtim and Palestinians? Same thing. The Plishtim were people who came from the European islands, right? Kaftor, right? And they took their boats and they came down the Mediterranean. Some landed on the Israeli coast, some landed on the Egyptian coast. They were invaders. They were European invaders, so they came to Africa. Or they were indigenous Africans that moved up. Either way, they say Eretz Yisrael belongs to the Canaanites. So he says, how do you know? Now, there was one very clever Jew. His name was Gavia ben Pesisa. This is the Gemara in Sanhedrin and Perek Chelek. He says, look, he was a comical-looking figure. He was a hunchback, a hoika, as they say in Yiddish. No one really took this man very seriously. But he was very clever and very knowledgeable. And the Jewish people were summoned to the world court. Does this sound familiar? The world court of Alexander the Great. Does that sound familiar? The UN, because after all, he was now the convener. He was really the head of all the nations, right? The Hellenistic empire, which was the entire world, as far as we knew, very quickly. So they quickly convened an international court. First thing was, kick the Jews out of Eretz Yisrael. Now, why kick the Jews out of Eretz Yisrael? Because that was in the period of the second Beis HaMikdash. And there was a Beis HaMikdash. That means there was a Jewish capital where? In East Jerusalem. The Australians threw us a bone, right? I think Charlie would like it better than we. Right? They said, West Jerusalem's the capital of Israel. Thank you very much. Gee, that really does a lot for us. That much reality you're not willing to deny. Okay, fine. That's what they did. The Australians recognized West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Thank you. But they wanted the Jews out of Yerushalayim, out of Eretz Yisrael. So they came with their case, and they presented their case. And guess what document they used? Which historical document, lahavdil, did they use to make their case in front of the International Court of Alexander the Great, the World Court? Yes. Well, it wasn't created quite yet, but they used the Torah. Because the Torah speaks about the land of the Canaanim. So they say, look, we have historical evidence that this is ours. So Gavia ben Pesisa says to the Jews, don't worry, I'm going to go. If I win, then they'll give credit to the Torah. If I lose, they'll say, he's nothing. Because he was not somebody that people looked at as a serious person, right? Because he was comical looking.
Because of his handicap?
Yeah, because of his handicap. Usually when you send somebody to Greeks, you had somebody who looked like Adonis. Everything was the body and the beauty. So it's all this is the undercurrent of the wisdom of Chazal here. They took somebody who's the ultimate anti-Greek, and they say, look, you don't know what you're talking about. So he goes there, and he says as follows. He says to the Canaanites, the Plishtim, he says, where are your proof from? He says, from the Torah. So he says, Afani lo avi raya element Torah. He says, I'll bring a proof from the Torah. It says like this. This is the first one, yeah. He said, cursed be Canaan, Arur Canaan, Eved Avanim, le Achav. He's going to be to his brothers an eternal slave, right? He says, well, you guys identify yourself as Canaanites. Canaan, the grandson of Noah, was cursed to become a slave to the other brothers. We're Shemites, you're our slaves. If a slave owns something, who really owns it? A master. Sorry, your claim is thrown out. So Alexander the Great, and this is also very interesting, says to them, I'll give you 3 days they asked for 3 days to come back with an appeal. Of course, all international courts, you have to be able to make an appeal, right? And they didn't come back because they had nothing to say. So what happened was as follows. The Gemara says that they ran away, they fled. Because they realized Alexander's now in charge.
The whole people ran away?
Those who sued, who were suing the world court that the Jews should be removed. We're not talking about millions of people here. We're talking about, small delegations. And how many Jews were there all together? We're talking about a couple 100,000. We're not talking about massive millions just yet. It's still very early on. It's 50 years into Bayit Sheni. How many Jews came down for Bayit Sheni? How many Jews altogether came down with Ezra? 40,000. Maybe you have 200,000 people now, a couple hundred. It's not huge, but it's significant. So they all ran away. They abandoned their fields, which were filled with produce. They abandoned their vineyards, which were filled with grapes. And it was Shemitah year. So the Jews didn't have any opportunity to work the land. They take the Palestinian grapes, olives, and whatever else, and they have everything that they need for Shemitah year. What's really going on in this story? A couple of important themes. Number one, as far as Alexander was concerned, the Torah was a legitimate legal document, but only a historical one. Only a historical one. Because whatever happened, happened. But going forward, we're going to treat this book what? As evidential evidence. We're not going to take a position whether there were miracles or not miracles, right? It's just part of the human knowledge base. Part of what man's scientific mind can analyze and contribute to. So not ironically, the death of Ezra the Sofer is the 8th day of Tevet, which is part of the 3-part fast. It represents 3 problems. 1, the loss of contact with Ezra the Sofer. What? Yeah, 8th day. Which was still what? Nevuah. That's why the book of Ezra and Nehemiah are part of the Torah. They're part of Kesuvim because he had Nevuah. Or Ruach HaKodesh, whatever you want to call it, whatever Daniel had, whatever Esther had, whatever they had, whatever Shlomo HaMelech had, that sort of was still in the category of Kitvei Kodesh. And that ends right there. The book of the Maccabees is not included in Kitvei Kodesh. That's the end part. Ptolemy comes, we shut the door. Literally, the time that the Torah was translated into Greek is exactly simultaneous with the end of Tanakh. You have to understand. This is why they chose this kind of cryptic date called Asar B'Teves. Yes, it was the siege of Yerushalayim, but there was so much more going on. The end of Nevuah, the descent of Torah into the realm of human wisdom by the nations of the world, and one more other very interesting event, which goes back to a quotation in Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch basically says, in the laws of Asar B'Teves, that we do not know exactly what happened on the 9th of Teves. The 8th of Teves, we know. The 10th of Teves, we know. But the 9th of Teves, there was a problem, Shulchan Aruch says, but we're not exactly sure what the problem was. Now, there is a Kabbalah, and this is brought down in the Luach of Eretz Yisrael, by the way, that something very dangerous happened on the 9th of Teves, and that was the emergence of Jewish Christians. The meaning. The original Jewish Christians. I have it here. 1 second. Now, the meaning that are referred to in the Mishnah are can be various different types of meaning. Some of them were early Christians, in which they said, well, the Messiah, we need the Messiah, right? And the Messiah is going to come in some sort of other form in which we will observe the mitzvos, but not exactly the way that we had them. So again, breaching the connection between Nevuah, Torah, and Eretz Yisrael. And it was very dangerous, as it is dangerous now. I don't have to tell you. My heart aches, and probably yours should too. My mother-in-law works in a hospital. And lots of people who would want to present themselves as clergy today, ever since maybe the 70s or earlier, J's for J, and what they call Messianic Jewish congregations, to such an extent that they want to be considered part of the Jewish community. They want to be listed in federation. I think there was just one federation, I think in Florida or something. There's a whole to-do that they wanted to be included in the umbrella of Jewish organizations, and they had a fancy footwork to let them out, because who's to say anybody shouldn't be allowed in? It's that bad. It's that bad. And there's a tremendous amount of missionary activity. No, thank God. But there's a tremendous amount of missionary activity going on. Tremendous amount. In fact, we have a close friend who made, and I do have the stories to tell, my Tevet stories, but I'm giving you the background first. So, who was we had a close friend back in the States. He was a Jewish fellow, married a Catholic girl. And he figured, I'll cut the difference, we'll become Messianic Jews. Right? Halfway between Christianity and Judaism, right? Halfway. So they started going, and then after a while he started realizing they're taking liberties with what? With the Torah. Just like these Canaanites wanted to twist the Torah to their own interpretations. He started to smell that it wasn't true. Came with questions. After a while they started to kick him out because he was asking questions in the study groups. What do you mean this isn't a reference to these? This is a reference to Yoshka, right? Who says it means this, right? Pshat. So eventually they threw him out, and he's decided he got connected to Chabad somehow, and he decides that he's going to become religious. There's one problem: his wife is Catholic, and so are his two kids. It was a process, but over time, the entire family became religious. And I want to say Zachur Latov, someone very legendary passed away this week, Rabbi Moshe Gottesman, who was the dean of Hank Yeshiva, and was a member of my shul, Young Israel Oceanside. And I want to just say that I was at his Levaya this past week. And these kids, of course, ended up somehow in Hank, which was the yeshiva that was willing to take them and work with them. And eventually the whole family converted. And in fact, Hani, my wife Hani, your daughter, was at their conversion, was one of their, just helping them out. Beautiful from family. The kid was studying here in Beit Shemesh in one of the yeshivos here, and that's a story. That's a story. But the point is that the danger of Jewish Christianity, which is still pervasive today, became a tremendous issue at that time. So what did the rabbis do? There is a theory. Now, you might remember there was a book called The Passover Plot. Who remembers The Passover Plot? They made it into a movie, right? It was how Yoshka staged his death, and they worked it, because he knew that if he wanted to win over the Jewish people, he would have to present himself as something miraculous, right? And he was playing to the Jewish audience. That's the Passover Plot. But there was another plot. It's referred to here in rabbinic sources, and that is to get the Judaism out of Christianity. Now, how do you do that?
I think that roughly was going on here, and they were called up to, let's say, the Shiur, and they didn't want to say it.
That's a mission. That was a sign, so throw him out, right? If he gets up and says, El Kan Sipur Yagir Mecha, God, you're as merciful, you're even merciful on the birds, because you don't let them take away the baby birds, So he's characterizing the mitzvahs as love. All you need is love and compassion. Wait a minute, what about Yira and Avoda and all the other responsibilities like mitzvahs, Shabbos, Yontif, and so on? No, Shabbos, that's not so important. Don't have to keep Shabbos anymore. Don't have to keep kosher anymore. Just have to be a wonderful, good person. So the only way to get Christianity out of the Jewish world was to take away what? Its Torah and mitzvahs. And turn it into some sort of universalistic love religion. Right? Of course, we know quite the opposite. They loved us to death. This is the problem. They love us to death. So some suggest that the very first Bishop of Rome, otherwise known as the first Pope, Lahavdil, His name, everybody knows, was called Paul of Tarsus. Paul of Tarsus. Shaul was his name. Was a Prushi, was a Talmud Chacham. There are those who suggest that he was approached by Chazal because he was a very charismatic person, and they said, we have a job for you. We want you to go to Rome and make sure that this religion goes far, far away from Yiddishkeit. How could it be far away? No bris milah, no Shabbos, no kashrus, no limud Torah of Shabbal Peh, and then we will know that if somebody chooses to be a Christian, they're going to do it with open eyes, but they're not going to fall into the trap of these rabbis who walk around with the talesim, and say all the prayers and look like a shul, like they entrap these poor Russian, people here in Eretz. By the way, here in Eretz Yisrael, they wanted to have a baptism on Shabbos. This was back about a year ago. And they took out a big hall in one, I'm not going to mention which city in Israel, and the city hall said they rented the hall. They're allowed to do their baptism there. People got up and they made a demonstration just to stop it. But, they present themselves as Jewish. So believe it or not, according to our sources, Paul took the advice of Chazal and sacrificed his own life and literally took all his adherents, went to Rome, and as far as they know, he never really came out too much. Some people say he stayed basically in the tower, which I guess was the First Vatican, and he did Torah mitzvahs on his own, but when he went out and spoke to people, he taught them a religion that was much, much more similar to paganism than close to a pagan. No bris milah, no Shabbos, no kashrus, no anything. Okay, and he dies on the 9th day of Teves. His yortzeit is the 9th day of Teves. So we kind of commemorate him as part of Asara B'Teves to remind ourselves of this terrible threat, a threat to the Jewish people, which really has never gone away. Really never gone away. So let's look at these 3 days. The 8th of Teves marks the death of Ezra HaSofer. For all intents and purposes, the beginning of the end of prophecy, the beginning of the diminishment of Torah, the light of Torah, and the challenge to halachic Judaism. The second thing was the Christians, the early Christians, and the response Chazal had was to remove them as much as possible, which would translate today to say that there should be no messianic shuls. You want to be Christian? Be Christian. Take off the talis. Don't make a Seder. Don't make Purim. Don't have Shabbos meals. Don't sing Zmiros, and then sneak in Yashka underneath. That's exactly the problem. We are very concerned about that. Jews are vulnerable. And then finally, of course, the siege of Yerushalayim, which means the beginning of the end of the Beit HaMikdash. So, based on what our tradition, what Chazal teach us, and what our authentic Jewish history shows us, the fast of Asar B'Teves is something a lot more than just about the Beit HaMikdash. It represents the challenge of Greco-Roman, of the Greek-Roman world, to swallow Yiddish, the light of Torah, in its entirety. Okay.